So, Truman doctrine, Marshall Plan, Berlin Blockade. That's what we're learning about today. And you can summarise it in this way. Truman doctrine is the President of the United States saying what his intentions are with regards to communism, i.e. that he's going to stop it from spreading around the world. That's a Truman doctrine. Marshall Plan, that's how he's going to stop it from spreading around the world, especially, well, it's how he's going to stop it from spreading around Europe. And then 3, the Berlin Blockade is the first major confrontation of the Cold War, when people thought there might have been an actual war between the USSR and the USA. It never came to be, but it was one big confrontation that in the end the United States ended up winning. So what happened? Well, the Truman Doctrine was a speech given by Truman, which basically was him saying that the United States would support the, and this is a quote from the speech, free peoples of the world who were at risk of not being able to choose their own governments. In other words, he was going to support the people who wanted democracy, or he was going to support democracy around the world and stand up to dictators and people who want to take over these places by force and not have elections. You can read between the lines here and see who he's aiming that at: Stalin, communism, the Soviet Union. So he made this speech, and from that point it was quite clear what Truman's intentions were. It's known, if you're going to be an A-star student, as the unofficial declaration of the Cold War. Now what I mean by that is, most wars, they start off, somebody declares war on somebody else and it starts. The Cold War wasn't a proper war, wasn't like the conventional wars, so nobody said it's on, but kind of this was Truman saying, this is it now. Our stance is to stop communism from spreading around the world. So that's why it's the unofficial declaration of the Cold War, according to many historians. So you could record that. Now, as we've talked about, communism is very attractive to poor people because it's an evening out of the wealth. And the Marshall Plan was $17 billion. Now that's a lot now. $17 billion in the 1940s is just so much money that you can't even begin to imagine how much money that is. And that's the amount the United States were willing to give to Europe to help it recover economically. And countries like Britain massively took advantage of that money, and our history books would probably be quite complimentary of that money in terms of how it helped Britain after the war. But America wasn't doing it because it was being kind. America was doing it to stop democracies voting for communism, especially in Western Europe. It wasn't a big fear in Britain, but it was in France and Italy. France and Italy, the communist parties were quite popular, but when Marshall Aid came in and the economy started to recover, it became less so. So yeah, and then the Berlin Blockade. Well, this is all to do with Germany. Britain, France and America joined their zones of Berlin and Germany together to create, originally it was just Britain and America, and they called their zone Bizonia, bicycle, and then France joined in and it became Trizonia, tricycle 3. So those zones were all joined together. That upset Stalin because he wanted to keep Germany weak. Remember, 25 to 27 million Soviets died in the Second World War. They've got a justifiable fear of Germany. Stalin was upset about them joining their zones together because it was helping Germany to recover economically, and he didn't want that. But the final straw came when they then introduced a new currency into Germany called the Deutschmark, which was definitely going to help the German economy, and it did. 3 days after this happened, and by the way, the West did not consult Stalin on this. They didn't say, do you want in? Do you want your zone to have the Deutschmark as well? Or sorry, Stalin, just to let you know, we're going to introduce a currency into our zone. It just happened. So Stalin responded to this by surrounding and blockading Berlin, which of course was in the middle of the Soviet zone. And so he cut off the roads, cut off the canals, cut off the railways from the west, so nothing could get into Berlin. And the idea was to force the West to give up Berlin. It was an island of capitalism in the sea of communism. It was going to be a big problem for the Soviets throughout the Cold War. And for a little while, it looked like it was going to work because the Allies were, what are we going to do? But eventually they decided to send stuff by air. Now, it was never definitely going to work, this, and it was going to cost a heck of a lot of money in the fuel and the aeroplanes and the supplies that they were taking into Berlin, but they went for it. And the 5,000 tons a day that Berlin needed as a minimum, they struggled to get to begin with. You know, people in Berlin were going hungry and they were getting cold when it gets to the winter time. But by the end, they managed to get the supplies into Berlin of 8,000 tons a day. At the height of the airlift, there was just plane after plane after plane coming into Berlin. And the whole time, everyone was waiting for an accident to happen, for a plane to get shot down by a trigger-happy Soviet, or to be something that happened which might trigger World War III. So this was a time of heightened tension. You only needed one thing to go wrong, one person to make a mistake, and the whole thing could go to pot. It never happened, and in the end, Stalin saw that it was just making him look stupid, really, because his blockade hadn't worked. The West were just going to keep going, and it turned the Berliners even more against the Soviets, because and made them feel as though the West was sort of their saviours. So there we go, and that's the Berlin airlift. So yeah.